Welcome, you curious minds, to another deep dive. Today, we're journeying back to a remarkably short, yet incredibly consequential period in American history. We're looking at 1840 to 1861.
Just 2 decades.
Exactly, just 2 decades. But in that time, the United States just exploded in size, only to fracture under the weight of one simmering, really intractable issue: slavery.
Yeah.
So our mission today is to truly understand how America became, well, a house divided. And we're pulling our insights from Chapter 13 of Eric Foner's Give Me Liberty.
That's right. And we'll trace the path from this extraordinary territorial expansion straight to the brink of civil war. We'll examine the pivotal events, the key figures, and, the powerful ideas that really pulled the nation apart.
Okay.
You'll see how seemingly unrelated developments became potent catalysts, how established political parties just crumbled, and how individuals like Abraham Lincoln emerged to fundamentally challenge the Union's very foundations.
And to really set the scene for this deep dive, let's maybe start with a striking visual from the era: the Statue of Freedom.
Ah, yes, on top of the Capitol dome.
That's the one. Now, originally the sculptor, Thomas Crawford, he designed it wearing a liberty cap.
Yeah.
A really powerful symbol of emancipated slaves.
Right.
But the chapter reveals this fascinating and frankly tragic detail. Secretary of War Jefferson Davis, himself a prominent slaveholder, insisted that the cap be replaced.
With a military helmet.
With a military helmet. And that seemingly small dispute, wow, it's so incredibly telling, isn't it?
It really is. Davis feared that direct connection, between the Liberty Cap and enslaved people's longing for freedom. And think about this. By the time that statue was actually installed in 1863, the country was already engulfed in war, and Jefferson Davis was president of the Confederacy.
Wow.
It perfectly illustrates how, by the mid-1850s, nearly every single public question, no matter how minor it seemed, had become just inextricably entangled in the gathering storm over slavery. So how did we get there?
Okay, so let's unpack this with the first major theme: continental expansion and this idea of manifest destiny. The 1840s saw this massive push westward, right?
Massive. Nearly 300,000 people moving to Oregon and California.
Just incredible numbers.
And manifest destiny, this term coined back in Chapter 9, it captured the belief that America was, divinely ordained to stretch across the continent to the Pacific.
Right, the sense of inevitable destiny.
But this expansion, particularly into former Mexican territories, it immediately brought the issue of slavery right to the forefront of national politics, not really through abolitionist arguments initially, but through land acquisition itself.
So if manifest destiny was this grand vision, where did these, soaring ambitions first collide head-on with that deeply rooted issue of slavery? Where did it ignite the fuse?
I'd say that collision point was undeniably westward expansion itself. This pursuit of new land, particularly into former Mexican territories, immediately and fatally forced the nation to confront the central contradiction of its ideals,
Which was
whether freedom would extend to all these new territories or if slavery would simply follow the flag. This expansion didn't just add land, it added, nitroglycerin to the national debate.
And Texas became the absolute first flashpoint in that explosive expansion.
Definitely.
And what's often overlooked, as Foner points out, is that Mexico had already abolished slavery.
That's crucial, yes.
Yet American settlers, granted land back in the 1820s, they insisted on bringing enslaved people into this technically free territory. That was an immediate setup for conflict.
Absolutely. By 1830, Mexico, kind of sensing its control slipping, banned further American emigration. And this, combined with demands from American settlers for greater autonomy, it just escalated tensions.
Right.
So when Mexico's General Santa Anna sent an army to assert central authority in 1835, it sparks the Texas Revolt.
Which, of course, leads to the iconic and tragic stand at the Alamo in March 1836. 187 defenders killed there.
A real rallying cry, even in tragedy.
But then Sam Houston's forces routed Santa Anna, securing Texas's independence. And Texas immediately called for union with the U.S.
They did. But President Martin Van Buren, acutely aware of the political powder keg, he shelved the question. He feared adding another slave state.
It seems even then the writing was sort of on the wall.
Indeed. But the issue wouldn't stay shelved. Not for long. The election of 1844 saw President John Tyler revive the annexation of Texas, and his Secretary of State, John C. Calhoun.
A major figure.
Oh, yes. He explicitly linked annexation to strengthening slavery. Then a little-known dark horse candidate, James K. Polk, emerged.
Dark horse, I like that.
Yeah, campaigning on the reannexation of Texas and the reoccupation of all of Oregon. Remember 54-40 fight?
Vaguely, yes.
He narrowly won, and Congress quickly declared Texas part of the U.S. in 1845. Polk had big ambitions, but California proved to be the ultimate prize.
So Polk wanted California, but Mexico refused to negotiate.
Right, it wouldn't sell.
So in April 1846, American soldiers moved into disputed territory between the Nueces River and the Rio Grande.
A deliberate provocation, arguably.
And when fighting inevitably broke out, Polk famously claimed Mexicans shed blood upon American soil and called for war. This was the start of the Mexican War.
The Mexican War, yeah, 1846 to 1848. It was widely supported by many embracing Manifest Destiny, but a vocal minority in the North vehemently dissented.
They saw it as a land grab for slavery.
Exactly, a plot to expand slavery. You had figures like Henry David Thoreau going to jail, refusing to pay taxes in protest, inspiring civil disobedience.
Right.
Even Abraham Lincoln, then just a congressman from Illinois, he questioned Polk's claims and the president's power to, quote, make war at pleasure. This was far from a universally popular endeavor.
So the war ends with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in February 1848. Tell us about that.
Huge consequences. The treaty confirmed Texas annexation, and it ceded California, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, Utah, all to the United States.
This Mexican cession, it was monumental, 500,000 square miles.
Roughly 1/3 of Mexico's total area at the time. It was just astonishing, the scale of this land acquisition.
And Foner mentions the Gadsden Purchase in 1853 kind of finalized the main boundaries.
Essentially, yes. By then, the present-day boundaries of the U.S. and North America were largely complete. But the real insight here, I think, isn't just the lines on the map.
What is it then?
It's how this relentless pursuit of manifest destiny immediately and fatally forced the nation back to that central contradiction. Freedom for whom? Would slavery just follow the flag into all this new territory?
It really was like adding fuel to the fire.
Or nitroglycerin, as I said, yeah.
And the human consequences of this rapid expansion were profound, especially for people already living there.
Absolutely. Foner highlights how race became deeply intertwined with manifest destiny, often presented as proof of, quote, Anglo-Saxon race superiority.
We see this in the Texas borderlands, right? Where relations between white settlers and Tejanos soured.
Terribly. You mentioned Juan Seguin, who fought for Texas independence.
Yeah, a hero of the revolt.
And he was driven from San Antonio by vigilantes. He lamented becoming a foreigner in my native land. It's heartbreaking.
And the Texas Constitution itself.
Right. It protected slavery, denied civil rights to Indians and people of African origin, but it defined Spanish Mexicans as white. It shows the complex and often contradictory racial lines being drawn.
It's fascinating that this racial element even played a role in stopping the U.S. from annexing all of Mexico.
True. There were fears about assimilating its large non-white Catholic population. Race was absolutely central to the expansionist mindset.
And as if that wasn't enough turmoil, just as the Mexican War ended.
Gold.
Yep, January 1848, Sutter's Mill, California.
The gold rush. This triggered this massive, incredibly diverse influx of people, right? Not just Americans from the East.
No, Mexicans, Chileans, Chinese, Irish, Germans, Australians. People poured in from all over the world.
Seeking fortune.
Seeking fortune. But this incredible diversity, combined with quickly exhausted surface mines, led to intense racial conflicts.
Well, white miners organized to expel foreign miners.
Mm-hmm.
The state legislature even imposed a hefty monthly tax specifically on them.
Wow. Targeted.
Very targeted. And for California's indigenous population, the gold rush was just catastrophic. Mass murders, forced enslavement. Their population plummeted from maybe 150,000 to just 30,000 by 1860.
Unimaginable human cost.
And it really was. The pursuit of wealth often came at that price.
You know, you mentioned earlier Ralph Waldo Emerson's prediction that acquiring Mexican territory would be like swallowing arsenic.
Mexico will poison us, yeah.
Looking at how these new territories immediately intensified the slavery debate, he was eerily spot on.
He absolutely was. Before 1846, slavery status was, well, somewhat settled. State law, the Missouri Compromise line.
There were established rules, sort of.
Right. But these vast new lands ripped open the fatal issue, as Foner calls it. Would slavery be allowed to expand into the West? This wasn't theoretical anymore. It was an urgent geographical crisis. Congress had to confront it.
And this leads us directly to the Wilmot Proviso in 1846. Congressman David Wilmot.
Yes. He proposed a resolution prohibiting slavery from all territory acquired from Mexico. Every square inch.
And this wasn't just another bill. It shattered party lines, didn't it?
Completely. Nearly all Northerners supported it. Nearly all Southerners opposed it. It passed the House.
But failed in the Senate. Critically.
Critically. And the proviso's failure and the deep sectional divide it revealed, that was a major catalyst. It spurred the formation of the Free Soil Party in 1848.
Nominated former President Martin Van Buren, interestingly.
Right. Their platform was simple but powerful. Bar slavery from Western territories and offer free homesteads. This free soil idea resonated deeply with many Northerners.
Why was that so appealing?
They saw the West as crucial for their own economic betterment, the chance for small farmers to succeed. And they feared competition with enslaved labor, what they called black labor.
But to white Southerners, this wasn't just about economics.
Not at all. It was an attack on their fundamental rights, as they saw it. Their right to take their property, including enslaved people, anywhere in the territories.
Existential threat.
Exactly. They saw any restriction on slavery's expansion as a threat to the institution itself, which they believed must expand or die. Plus, they feared becoming a permanent minority in Congress, unable to protect their interests. It was fast becoming a zero-sum game.
That's a crucial point. So the crisis escalated quickly. By 1850, California wants admission as a free state.
Right, threatening the sectional balance in the Senate big time.
So, in response, Senator Henry Clay offers the Compromise of 1850.
The Great Compromiser tries again.
What was in this complex package?
Okay, 4 main parts. 1, California enters as a free state, good for the North. 2, the slave trade, not slavery itself, but the trade abolished in Washington, D.C.
Symbolic, but important.
3, a tough new Fugitive Slave Act, big win for the South. And 4, the status of slavery in the rest of the Mexican cession territories. That would be decided by popular sovereignty.
Meaning, the local white inhabitants get to vote on it.
Exactly. Let the settlers decide.
The debates must have been fierce.
Legendary. You had Daniel Webster supporting compromise, even the fugitive slave law, just to keep the Union together. Then John C. Calhoun, basically on his deathbed, rejecting any compromise, demanding the North yield completely.
On the other side,
William H. Seward of New York, invoking a higher law than the Constitution, condemning slavery morally. It was a real clash of ideologies. The compromise only passed after President Taylor, who opposed parts of it, suddenly died. Millard Fillmore took over and pushed it through.
and of all those parts, that Fugitive Slave Act proved the most divisive right.
Oh, absolutely. It allowed federal commissioners to decide the fate of alleged fugitives with no jury trial. And it compelled ordinary citizens, even in the North, to help capture runaways.
And didn't this expose a kind of hypocrisy? Southern leaders usually championing states' rights.
Precisely. Now they demanded strong federal intervention, reaching into the North to protect slavery. It revealed their ultimate priority wasn't states' rights, it was slavery.
And this led to resistance?
Dramatic resistance. Fugitives, helped by abolitionists and the Underground Railroad, which really ramped up its efforts using the new railroads, they often violently resisted recapture. Thousands fled to Canada. It really challenged that image of the U.S. as an asylum for freedom.
So this peace, this compromise of 1850, it was fragile. Temporary.
Very temporary, just a pause, really. Because in 1854, Senator Stephen A. Douglas drops another bombshell, the Kansas-Nebraska Act.
Douglas again. He wanted a transcontinental railroad, right?
Yes, he was a big proponent of Western development, and to get Southern support for his preferred railroad route starting in Chicago, he made a fateful deal.
What was the deal?
He proposed repealing the Missouri Compromise line, the line that had prohibited slavery in those northern territories for over 30 years.
Wow, just repeal it.
Just repeal it, and instead apply popular sovereignty to the Kansas and Nebraska territories. Let the settlers there decide on slavery.
Okay. Proposing popular sovereignty in lands where slavery had been explicitly forbidden, that must have caused an uproar in the North.
Absolute outrage. Anti-slavery congressmen issued the Appeal of the Independent Democrats, called it an atrocious plot to turn free land into slave land. Betrayal.
But the acts passed.
It became law, but the cost was immense. It utterly shattered the Democratic Party's unity. It fundamentally reorganized American politics. The Whig Party just collapsed. Gone. The South solidified into a Democratic stronghold. And in the North, this powerful new party arose, the Republican Party.
Dedicated specifically to stopping slavery's expansion.
Exactly. That was its core principle.
So this Republican Party's rise, it wasn't just about Kansas, Nebraska, was it? It also reflected these huge underlying economic and social changes happening in the North.
Precisely. The period from, say, 1843 to 1857 saw explosive economic growth, especially up north, driven largely by the completion of this vast railroad network.
Connecting everything.
Right. By 1860, 30,000 miles of track, mostly in the north, linked eastern cities with western farming centers. It totally reoriented trade away from the Mississippi River and the south towards the East Coast.
So the Northeast and the Old Northwest became economically tied together.
Exactly. And that economic integration laid the groundwork for their political unification under the Republicans. Industrial production boomed there too. Cities like Chicago became major manufacturing centers. The South grew, yes, but mostly in cotton. It didn't share in this broad industrial boom.
And this economic divergence fueled the Republican free labor ideology.
Absolutely. They glorified the North. Progress, opportunity, freedom, a place where ordinary laborers could achieve economic independence, own their own farm or shop.
The American dream, Northern style.
Kind of, yeah. And slavery, by contrast, they argued, created a degraded society, static, hierarchical, denying opportunity. So they insisted slavery had to be kept out of the territories so free labor could flourish there.
They weren't necessarily full abolitionists then.
Not all of them, no. But many, like William H. Seward, saw this division free labor north versus slave labor south as an irrepressible conflict. It wasn't just about economics. It was setting the stage for a fundamental clash of civilizations, almost.
And then events on the ground just poured fuel on that fire. Bleeding Kansas.
Yeah, that term says it all. When Kansas held elections in 54 and 55, hundreds of pro-slavery Missourians, these border ruffians, flooded across the border to cast fraudulent votes.
Stealing the election.
Basically, a sporadic, brutal civil war erupted. About 200 people died. Lawrence, a free soil stronghold, was attacked. It made a mockery of Douglas's popular sovereignty idea. How could settlers decide peacefully if there was fraud and violence?
And the violence even spilled into Congress itself, the Sumner beating.
Unbelievable. Representative Preston Brooks of South Carolina beat Senator Charles Sumner of Massachusetts unconscious on the Senate floor with a cane because Sumner gave an anti-slavery speech.
It's just a chilling image of how broken things had become.
Truly. Civil discourse was dead. Physical assault in the Senate.
So in the election of 1856, this brand new Republican Party nominates John C. Fremont.
The Pathfinder, yeah. Democrat James Buchanan won, partly because he'd been out of the country and wasn't tied to Kansas, Nebraska. But Fremont carried 11 of the 16 free states.
Incredible for a two-year-old party.
Remarkable. It showed the political landscape had completely shifted. Parties were now starkly sectional.
Then came President Buchanan's administration. Foner portrays it as disastrous.
Yeah, pretty much. And just 2 days after his inauguration, March 1857, the Supreme Court drops the Dred Scott decision.
Dred Scott v. Sanford. This intensified the crisis like almost nothing else, didn't it?
It really did. The court declared that only white persons could be citizens. It stated, chillingly, that black people had no rights which the white man was bound to respect.
Just devastating.
And it ruled Congress had no power to prohibit slavery in the territories, making the Missouri Compromise, already repealed by Kansas, Nebraska, unconstitutional retroactively, and undermining popular sovereignty, too.
So slavery could go anywhere now?
According to the court and President Buchanan, yes. Slavery, Buchanan announced, existed in all territories by virtue of the Constitution.
This must have absolutely inflamed the North.
It did, and Buchanan made it worse. He tried to force Kansas into the Union as a slave state under the fraudulent Lecompton Constitution. It wasn't even submitted to a fair popular vote.
And didn't that push Stephen Douglas?
It did. Douglas, the champion of popular sovereignty, actually allied with Republicans to block the Lecompton Constitution because it was so obviously fraudulent. This further fractured the Democratic Party. The Supreme Court and the president had effectively sided with the South, and it just broke the political system.
And this deeply fractured nation leads us to the Lincoln-Douglas debates of 1858.
Right. Abraham Lincoln, then a relatively unknown former Whig, challenges the famous Stephen Douglas for his Senate seat in Illinois.
And Lincoln gives that iconic House Divided speech.
A house divided against itself cannot stand. He argued the nation couldn't endure permanently half slave and half free. One side or the other had to prevail.
Their debates, held across Illinois, really highlighted these clashing ideas of freedom, right?
Absolutely. For Lincoln, freedom meant opposing slavery's expansion. It meant the opportunity, even for black men, to better his condition, to earn the fruits of their own labor. basic economic liberty.
And Douglas?
Douglas championed local self-government popular sovereignty, but he also cleverly argued territories could effectively exclude slavery simply by not passing local laws to protect it. The Freeport Doctrine.
A way to sidestep the Dred Scott ruling, kinda.
Sort of. But Lincoln pressed him on the moral issue. Lincoln, despite sharing some racial prejudices of his time, and he wasn't advocating for full social equality, he insisted black people were entitled to the natural rights mentioned in the Declaration of Independence: life, liberty, pursuit of happiness.
Whereas
Douglas openly embraced white supremacy. He argued the government was made by white men for the benefit of white men. Starkly different views.
And Douglas won the Senate seat, but the debates made Lincoln a national figure.
Propelled him onto the national stage, absolutely. And the election results in Illinois showed just how sharply divided the state and the nation was.
Then the tension ramps up even further with John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry, October 1859.
John Brown, a truly polarizing figure. He'd already murdered pro-slavery settlers back in Bleeding, Kansas. Now he leads this small band, 21 men, including 5 black men, to seize the federal arsenal at Harper's Ferry, Virginia.
Hoping to spark a slave uprising.
That was the plan, a general rebellion. But it failed quickly. Federal troops under Colonel Robert E. Lee captured him.
Brown was tried for treason, convicted, and executed.
Yes. And his execution turned him into a martyr for many abolitionists in the North. But in the South, he became the embodiment of their worst fears, Northern fanatics inciting slave revolt, terrifying extremism.
And his last letter, prophetic.
Chillingly so. I, John Brown, am now quite certain that the crimes of this guilty land will never be purged away but with blood.
Wow. This raid, plus the growing strength of the Republicans, really intensified Southern nationalism, didn't it?
It absolutely did. You saw the rise of the fire eaters, these radical Southern politicians openly advocating secession, not just defending slavery, but envisioning an independent slave empire, expanding south, maybe into Cuba. Remember the Ostend Manifesto?
Right, that call to seize Cuba back in '54.
It was all part of this expansionist dream, now fueled by fear and defiance. By 1860, Southern leaders were declaring, "Slavery is our king." They demanded the Democratic platform pledge to protect slavery in all territories.
A demand no Northern politician could possibly accept.
Exactly. It guaranteed the destruction of the Democratic Party as a national institution.
And so the election of 1860 arrives, and the Democratic Party shatters.
Completely fragments. Stephen Douglas runs on popular sovereignty, mostly in the North. John C. Breckinridge runs on protecting slavery everywhere, carrying the Deep South.
And there was a third party.
The Constitutional Union Party. Kind of a last refuge for former Whigs and moderates. They nominated John Bell on a simple platform, preserved the Constitution as it is and the Union as it was. Vague, but hoping to avoid the slavery issue.
Meanwhile, the Republicans nominate Abraham Lincoln.
Right. Their platform denied the Dred Scott decision's legitimacy, reaffirmed opposition to slavery's expansion, but also added key economic planks: free homesteads, a protective tariff, a transcontinental railroad designed to appeal to a broad northern base beyond just anti-slavery voters.
And Lincoln wins.
He does. He carries all of the North, except for splitting New Jersey, wins a clear majority of electoral votes, even though he received virtually no votes in 10 southern states.
The election results couldn't have been more sectional.
Starkly sectional. It confirmed the deep, maybe irreparable division. For many white Southerners, Lincoln's victory meant their future, their way of life, their property was now at the mercy of a party avowedly hostile to their region's core interests.
They didn't necessarily think Lincoln would abolish slavery overnight where it existed.
No, Lincoln had pledged not to do that. But they feared the long-term implications. A future of being perpetually outnumbered, unable to protect slavery, maybe eventually strangled by federal policy. Ultimate extinction, they feared.
So rather than accept being a permanent minority within the Union,
the Deep South's political leaders struck for independence. South Carolina, the state with the highest percentage of enslaved people in a long history of radicalism, went first. December 20, 1860.
Just weeks after the election.
Yes. And its declaration of secession placed slavery squarely, unequivocally, at the center of the crisis. No ambiguity there.
And in the months that followed, before Lincoln even took office,
6 more states from the Cotton Kingdom, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Texas, they all seceded. They formed the Confederate States of America.
chose Jefferson Davis as their president.
The same Jefferson Davis who worried about the liberty cap on the statue and the Confederate Constitution. Modeled on the U.S. Constitution in many ways, but it explicitly guaranteed slave property, both in the states and in any territories the new nation might acquire.
And the Vice President, Alexander H. Stephens,
Gave that infamous cornerstone speech. Declared the Confederacy was founded on the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man, that slavery, subordination to the superior race, is his natural and normal condition.
Chillingly clear. Meanwhile, during this secession crisis, what was President Buchanan doing? He was still in office.
He seemed paralyzed. Foner describes him as denying states had the right to secede, but also claiming the federal government had no constitutional right to use force against them, a recipe for inaction.
Were there any last-ditch efforts at compromise?
Senator John J. Crittenden of Kentucky proposed one, the Crittenden Compromise. It would have guaranteed slavery where it existed forever through a constitutional amendment and extended the Missouri Compromise line to the Pacific for all future territories.
But Lincoln rejected it.
Lincoln stood firm, particularly against the expansion of slavery into the territories. He believed that was the core issue, the one Republicans were elected to stop. He felt surrendering to the demands of those who had just lost the election through secession would mean the end of us and the end of the government. Popular government itself would be finished.
So, March 4th, 1861, Lincoln delivers his inaugural address.
Yes, he tried to be conciliatory, yet firm. He rejected the right of secession, called it anarchy. But he also repeated his pledge not to interfere with slavery where it existed.
He vowed to hold remaining federal property, like forts.
Right. But he ended with that powerful direct appeal. In your hands, my dissatisfied fellow countrymen, and not in mine, is the momentous issue of civil war. The government will not assail you. You can have no conflict without being yourselves the aggressors.
He was putting the ball in their court.
Exactly. Lincoln carefully maneuvered to ensure that if war came, the South would fire the first shot. And that's precisely what happened. April 12, 1861, Fort Sumter.
A Union fort in the harbor of Charleston, South Carolina. Secessionist territory.
Lincoln announced he was sending ships to resupply the fort, just with food, non-military aid. But Jefferson Davis and the Confederate government saw it as an act of coercion. They demanded the fort's surrender. When the commander refused,
Confederate batteries opened fire.
They did. They bombarded the fort for over 30 hours.
The fort surrendered on April 14th.
Yes. The next day, Lincoln proclaimed that an insurrection existed and called for 75,000 state militia troops to put it down.
And that call for troops prompted more states to secede.
4 more states from the upper South Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Arkansas, rather than fight against fellow Southerners, they joined the Confederacy. The lines were drawn. As Lincoln later reflected simply, and the war came.
So there you have it. Wow. A journey through just 2 incredibly turbulent decades where America's destiny seemed both manifest, this inevitable expansion, and yet deeply, deeply conflicted.
Yeah.
We've seen how westward expansion, these attempts at political compromise, legal decisions like Dred Scott, acts of violence like Bleeding Kansas and Harper's Ferry, they all converged, turning a nation, quite literally, into a house divided. We've traced the rise of the Republican Party, fueled by those northern economic changes and that powerful free labor ideology, set against a South increasingly defined by its absolute commitment to slavery and a growing sense of distinct, threatened nationalism.
And we've watched figures like Lincoln, initially not that well known outside Illinois, get shaped by these events and then in turn shape the course of history.
It's really striking, isn't it, how that very pursuit of expansion, something that seemed to embody American freedom and opportunity, ultimately forced the nation to confront the most profound contradiction embedded within that freedom. Freedom for whom?
Exactly. This deep dive really reveals that the path to civil war wasn't some sudden snap. It was a complex, grinding series of choices, events, and just escalating tensions over decades. It really was. And, it raises a fundamental question, maybe one for us to think about today, too. In a nation defined by its ideals, what happens when those ideals come into direct, seemingly irreconcilable conflict? When compromise feels impossible? How does a society decide which definitions of freedom will ultimately prevail when the house feels so deeply divided?